Hello everyone. So the purpose of this video is just to give you a general overview of Kant's philosophy. Um, a few things to keep in mind is that Kant is a systematic philosopher. So he is wanting to give us kind of a theory of everything, or a theoretical framework that is going to ground scientific knowledge and provides certain sort of limitations, systemic limitations on what philosophy can do and what philosophy cannot do. So Kant was concerned with what he called dogmatism, and he was worried that dogmatic philosophers, which was his name for metaphysicians who kept on in the old metaphysical tradition that can be traced back to like the scholastics and medieval Catholic philosophy. He was worried that these dogmatic philosophers, as he called them, were speculating beyond the bounds of what human reason was capable of. So they were making claims and saying that they had access to knowledge that was actually outside the scope of what humans were even capable of knowing. So one of the things that Kant wants to do is sort of rein that in. So he wants to place some limits on metaphysical speculation, particularly, such that philosophy can do more, I think Kant would say, more responsible work. So this is important for a variety of things that Kant does. I've been talking about limits on metaphysics, but of course this feeds into his ethical theory. Two of his major ethical works contain metaphysics in the title: Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals and The Metaphysics of Morals. So clearly, as a systematic philosopher, Kant thought that what he was doing by imposing limits on metaphysical speculation was also serving other areas of philosophical inquiry, like ethics or the study of logic or something like that, right? So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind. I want to get into some details of Kant's critical philosophy. Most of what I'm about to explain is really in the Critique of Pure Reason. So this is probably the standard academic translation of the Critique of Pure Reason, published by the good people at Cambridge. There's a whole series of these translations, Cambridge edition of the works of Kant. Pretty standard if you're reading Kant in English to use those, translated by Paul Geyer and Alan Wood. So in the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant is really going after this imposing limits on the use of reason and establishing what he considers to be responsible metaphysical speculation. So a large focus in the Critique of Pure Reason is epistemological. It concerns knowledge, theories of knowledge, how we know what we know, that kind of thing. But it also ventures into metaphysics. He outlines, for instance, what it means to be the kind of rational being that humans are, how our cognition works to shape the world that we experience in certain ways. He outlines sort of metaphysical positions like transcendental idealism. By the way, he also says that he is not just a transcendental idealist, but is also an empirical realist. So we'll maybe talk at the end here about what that might mean. So I just want to do some sort of broad explanation here of what's going on. So to start with, it's helpful to know what critique means in the context of Kant. I think too often contemporary readers conflate critique with criticism, and we use those words casually in an interchangeable way. Kant really means more like, I'm going to lay out the conditions that make something possible. So there can be an element of criticism to a critique, but that's not really where the focus is. What is really the concern is to show what conditions must be in place in order for certain things to happen or to come about. So in the Critique of Pure Reason, what is interesting for Kant is what conditions make experience possible. Not just experience, but the specific kinds of experience that human beings have, right? So our experience is shaded and shaped in certain ways. We experience things in space and time. Those are two of the most fundamental forms of experience for Kant. We experience things as having causal relations, as having dimensions like depth and all kinds of stuff. So why does human experience appear to us in this way? Why not some other variety of experience that doesn't involve some of these aspects like depth and breadth and succession, that kind of stuff, right? So those are the sorts of things that Kant is interested in. Now, it's the critique of pure reason. So Kant is not necessarily interested in any particular experience. Right now I'm sitting here in my office with books, talking to this camera and so on and so forth. My experience right now has like very particular content to it. It's about something specific. Kant's not worried about that kind of specific experience. He's worried about the very general form and shape of experience that you could put any content into. So he's thinking about it in terms of like a schematic, something that you could fill with any kind of content, right? So that places the critique of pure reason at a pretty high level of abstraction. Now, Kant will use, and if you read Kant, you'll see that he will use specific examples, but he's not giving you these examples. There's nothing about the specific content of the examples that are super important. It's the way the content gets shaped and molded by the form or the formal element, the structure, the schematic that any specific content will get molded into. So that's why I said earlier, space and time are two of the most fundamental ways in which humans have experience. Now, the tricky thing for Kant is that we don't really know space and time conceptually on a conscious level. It's not like we walk around every day and we're like, I will now judge this object to be in space. I will judge that object to be in time. No, of course, that's not what our experience of the world is like. Things are kind of presented to us as already being in space and time, right? So the application of these concepts to our experience happens almost like behind our back, before we are even having the experiences that we are having. They have to be built in to our cognitive apparatus. So this is what Kant means when he says that these are a priori. They come before we have any experience, and in fact they're necessary for us to have the kind of experiences that we have. So what Kant is going to try to do is sort of like work back to those concepts. He's going to take, okay, so you're having this kind of experience, and he's going to try and make the concept that informs that experience explicit. So he's going to try to deduce it, starting from certain given conceptual experiences of the world. So things are appearing to me, they're appearing in space and time, but I don't have like a conscious, explicit idea of space and time yet. I can work my way back to those, and I can formalize my experience into the concept of space and time, but I don't know it from the outset. My mind just works according to the rules of space and time. When I get some sense data in, my mind goes to work on it before I'm even conscious of it. It shapes it into the mold of space and time, and it says, here's this object, now you're having an experience, and it happens to be in space and time. So again, I'm not conscious of space and time as a concept. This is why Kant calls them the pure forms of intuition, right? Space is the pure form of outer intuition, time is the pure form of inner intuition. For the kind of to see the big picture of what Kant's doing, those sorts of details aren't exactly important right now. We can get into that later, and if you want to read Kant more seriously, those sorts of fine-grained distinctions he makes are very significant. For us at this level, what we really just want to focus on is the fact that my mind is shaping my experience as it gets data through the senses. So as light and sound are impacting and impressing themselves upon my ears and eyes and so on, in order to become conscious of those things, they have to go through like a process of cognition whereby certain concepts are applied to them that make them sensible to me. And again, it's not like I'm consciously applying these. It's not happening explicitly like, oh, data comes in, I apply causation to it. No, all that happens before it's even possible to become conscious, right? My mind, my cognitive apparatus is like rendering the sense data that I get according to these rules, right? That's why the experiences I have the shape and the feel that they do, right? So one way to think about these concepts, like space and time, what Kant calls concepts of the understanding, is that they're rules. This is what is so important for reason, right? Why is it the critique of pure reason? Well, reason governs things according to rules. This will be really, really important for Kant's ethics, actually, and how Kant makes the kinds of arguments he does, is that reason is the rule maker. It provides the rules that give structure and order and to things, right? It's why my experiences have meaning and significance for me. I don't walk around the world usually in some sort of fog, not knowing where I am or what anything is or whatever. No, things are sort of laden with meaning and significance. I walk into a room and there are parts of the room that just make sense to me. Oh, there's some chairs, a table, the ceiling is up, the room is so deep, it has some shadow back there in the corner. I mean, there are just these intuitive ways in which the world makes sense to me. And the reason why is because these rules get applied to it, and then the sense data is like presented to me as a package, an already sensible package that I can navigate in a meaningful way. But I need all of these operations, these cognitive functions, to be going on sort of before I even become conscious, right? Because they're just structuring raw data. This comes about through one of the key distinctions that Kant makes, right? So what I have access to, that experience that's been worked up for me, is the phenomenal. That's the world of appearances, right? That's what I navigate and what I have knowledge of, and it's the world as it is just given to me according to the rules provided to it by reason. It's the world that reason has worked up and shaped into something sensible and significant for me. Outside of that phenomenal world, there is the world sort of as it is in itself, to use some of Kant's language. The world as it exists independently of my cognition of it. Now that's what makes Kant an empirical realist. He thinks that that stuff is out there, something exists. There are, well, see, I'm already getting ahead of myself because we can't even really call them things or objects or whatever it is. It's just being, or I don't even know what, you can't say much about it because it exists independently of your cognitive apparatus. So this is what is known as the noumenal. And this distinction between the phenomenal, which is the world as it appears to me, and the noumenal, which is the world as it is in itself, is really an insurmountable gap for Kant. I can't really say anything about how the world is in and of itself. Why? Well, because these rational procedures are being applied to what is given to me through intuition before I even have a conscious experience of it. So that means there's always this mediation between me and objects. Everything is shaped by my rational capacity. Everything is filtered through these concepts of the understanding. And so I never have access to any object that it is in and of itself. I only have access to what can appear to me through my rational capacity, right? But these are always filtered. There's always this mediation. That's one way to think about it, that there is no immediate access to objects as they are in themselves. You all only have mediated access through these rules that work on the raw sense data in order to present us then with something meaningful and sensible that we can consciously navigate and all that kind of stuff. So this has consequences for Kant across a wide variety of philosophical areas, or he's going to use this to really rein in metaphysics, and he's going to say that there are certain metaphysical questions that, because of the limits placed on us by our capacity for reason, we really just can't say too much about. So he wrote a very famous book on religion called Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. I think that's a typical translation of the title, but the idea obviously is, I'm just going to talk about reason within the bound, or I'm going to talk about religion rather, within the bounds of reason. So a lot of sort of mystical, theological speculation is off limits for Kant. We can think about them and we can imagine certain things, but we're not going to be able to provide like rational argumentation that will ground it in a type of certain knowledge, right? You just can't know. You can believe, and you might even have reason for believing, but you'll just never know certain things about the immortality of the soul, whether or not God exists for sure. Again, Kant thinks that there might be good reason to believe in God, but it's not an object of knowledge, because God's existence transcends the capacity for human reason to grasp him or whatever. It already loses the ability to really talk meaningfully about it in a sort of, in what Kant thinks is a philosophically responsible way. So he got in a lot of trouble for that particular book. People viewed it as being atheistic in certain ways. Now Kant himself is not an atheist, but if you're a sort of more traditional religious believer at the time, in the late 18th century, in the 1780s, 1790s, when Kant is really putting out a lot of this work, it's alarming, right? Oh, you're telling me I can't know whether God exists. You're saying I can't know whether the soul, is immortal. It was pretty disturbing, I think, to a lot of people. So Kant got in a little trouble for that particular topic, and was told not to write on religion anymore. So he respected that decree and ceased his writing on religion explicitly for a little while anyway. So those are sort of the broad outlines of Kant, specifically in the Critique of Pure Reason, that I think are significant. So again, there's this distinction between the world as it appears to me, the phenomenal world, and the noumenal world, which is the world as it is in itself, independently of how I perceive it, or anything like that, right? Now, the phenomenal world is shaped a priori, behind the scenes, unconsciously, by certain rational procedures. It's governed by rules that give my experience the shape and the feeling. It makes it into the kind of experience that I have, right? So reason provides the rules whereby my experience takes on the shape and the form that it takes. we can learn what these rules are, and we can make them explicit. We can turn them into concepts by reflecting upon our experience and trying to parse out its formal elements. So I can develop a concept of space and a concept of time, a concept of cause. But I do that all sort of after the fact, right? That's all an afterthought. My experience is already at the fundamental level shaped by these rational procedures before I even become conscious of it, right? That's how I become conscious, right? So it has to happen sort of before consciousness at the unconscious level. It's what makes it possible for me to become conscious and have the kind of conscious experience I do have, right? Now, I just want to emphasize, because I'm going to talk in the next couple of videos about the grounding of the metaphysics of morals. So I just want to really emphasize that reason is providing rules, and that's going to be really important for Kant's moral philosophy, for his ethics. He's going to turn to reason in an attempt to deduce rules, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and that is a sort of very broad-brushed general overview of Kant's project, his attempt to sort of rein in metaphysical speculation.